Hey everybody, how's it going? It's May 15th. Baseball Legends Facebook follow-up videos here. So let's see what we have today. Baseball season is long, 162 games. Throughout the season, there are several individual milestones and accomplishments that are achieved that make the season stand out for a player. On this date in baseball history, 3 players achieved significant single-season milestones. 1941, Joe DiMaggio recorded a hit against Edgar Smith of the White Sox, and basically that was the start of his hit streak, which landed at 56 consecutive games with at least one hit, which is still the record today, which is one of the most cherished records and probably one that's not likely to be met. It can be met. It's not impossible, but just with the way that today's game is, guys sitting out, guys, facing relievers, there's more pitchers. It's just a lot more to deal with to string this together than back then. So it wasn't easy back then, but definitely much more impossible looking in today's game than it was when Joe DiMaggio set the record. All right, so we got 68 Tigers. Denny Mclean had a historic season when he won 31 games. That's another thing that's not happening today. He would be just the 4th pitcher to win 30 games since the dead ball era ended in 1920 and would have proved to be the last pitcher to do so. And basically on this date in 1968, he found himself in hot water with the Detroit fans after he called them the biggest frontrunners in the world on a local radio show. At the end of the season, he had a different tune, and basically they were applauding his 30th win, and in doing that, he said basically Detroit fans are the best in the world. So that happens all the time. Basically, you're booing me, I hate you. We're losing, you're booing, I hate you. We're winning, you're cheering, I love you. It's a love-hate relationship with fans and teams and players. And in the history of baseball, only 5 pitchers have tossed 2 no-hitters in the same season. Plus, special recognition to Roy Halladay, who tossed a no-hitter during the 2010 season and another in the playoffs that season. Roy Halladay has a documentary that I don't know if it came out yet, but it's coming out soon. I saw an ad for it. I think it's ESPN. I could be wrong, but that looks interesting. Obviously, he died, unfortunately, early in a plane crash, but one of the greatest pitchers in my era, and in my opinion, because he was just one of those guys that was a bulldog. He was big. He was like 6'6", heavy downward action on his fastball, unbelievable control, a couple different breaking balls. He was just a very intelligent pitcher out there and precise and efficient. And what's crazy about him is he started with the Blue Jays, and he actually got sent down to the minors, a couple seasons in. And then all of a sudden, that was really like the turnaround point, and then he ended up being with the Phillies, World Series, and the whole 9 yards. So, great pitcher, and I'm looking forward to watching that documentary whenever I get a chance to. All right. So, the other 2 pitchers out of the 5 that tossed 2 no-hitters in the same season threw them on this date, one of them on this date in baseball history. So, 52, Virgil Trucks no-hit the Senators, and then later no-hit the Yankees. Nolan Ryan no-hit the Royals, and that was the first of Nolan Ryan's 7 career no-hitters, which is another crazy number that is kind of hard to imagine anybody getting to at this point either, because, pitchers don't throw complete games. They don't go as deep, so they're not conditioned to be as sharp in the 8th, 9th inning when you need to really bear down, and then they also don't get as many opportunities. So that's an interesting one. But what single season accomplishment is basically most impressive to you. So this could go, I'm sure, in 1,000 different directions, because what's most impressive to you might not be as impressive to somebody else, but nothing is wrong, nothing is right. But let's see what everybody said here. Let's start at the bottom. Okay. Got a lot going on here. All right, so Christopher Rowe, Ted Williams hitting 406. Bob Gibson, 112. ERA, 1968. And then Sandy Koufax had 3 seasons, 300 Ks. 382 in 1965. Henderson, 130 stolen bases, and Ichiro's 262 hits in 2004. So those are all good picks. And like I said, it's kind of hard to narrow down to what is the most, but these are all very good. So, all right. So I see a little Ted Williams kind of talk here. So let's go with the other guys first, and I'll scroll down to that. Ichiro came over from Japan. He was already a professional. He had, I don't know the exact number, but at least over 1,000 hits in his Japanese professional career. Comes over here, is basically just an immediate star. Small, basically fast as anything. Amazing hand-eye coordination and back control. And when I think of Ichiro, I think of that first, is the fact that you really have never seen a guy in today's baseball do the things that he's done, which is weird to say because really there's a lot of athletic talent on a baseball field nowadays. But his ability to just kind of position the ball with his bat off a pitch was unbelievable. Like, he would intentionally, hit choppers. That's something that we've seen. But then he would take it a step further and bloop the ball. So instead of hitting it full force, he'd let up and bloop it over an area. One time I saw, he placed the ball over the pitcher's head right before second base. And you could see the swing. He stopped his swing just to get enough, almost like a drag bunt where it pops up in the air. But he did it with a swing, which was just crazy. And that was part of the reason 262 hits, which is the all-time record, still is a number that's really only for somebody who knows how to position the baseball, not obviously like Ichiro, but you have to be able to hit all fields with the shifting. You have to be willing to take what's given to you. So you can't go up there, try to hit, home runs, and then expect, with the shift to get a lot of hits in a season. So you also, the key to this, which I think a lot of people might not think of, is you have to be a free swinger to really get 262 hits or anywhere near it. Because if you're walking, that's taking chances to get hits away. So your odds. So 262, the average player probably gets, who's a starter, like an Ichiro, plays nearly every day, probably 550, 600 at-bats. And I'd be curious to look how many actual official at-bats Ichiro had compared to somebody like A-Rod, or, whoever power hitter you want to pick that would walk more often than that. So with walks, the other thing is strikeouts. You got to put the ball in play. If you want to get hits, you need to make the defense work. It's one of the oldest baseball sayings. So don't strike out. Put the ball in play. Make something happen. And that's what he did. That is something that is lost on today's game a little bit, or a lot of it, but Ichiro put all those things together, and the last thing that allowed him was speed. That speed he had was unreal, really. And he chopped that ball up in the air. By the time anyone got to it, he was already at first base. So a lot of his hits were of that variety. He also lined the ball over the field. So it wasn't just, cheap hits, if you want to call it that. But the other unique thing about Ichiro was he didn't hit a lot of home runs overall or in any season, very few. But everybody who's ever talked about Ichiro, a teammate or, knows his game, would say in batting practice he would hit the ball over the fence and as far as anybody when he wanted to. So it wasn't a matter of he had no power. It was a matter of he decided that that's not the way I want to go about the game. And my best strategy to be successful and have the team be successful is for me to use my speed, get on base, and get on base as much as possible. And that's exactly what he did. So one guy said, I forget who, a player, that if Ichiro wanted to, he could hit 40 home runs in a season and would definitely be a 25-plus home run guy every year that he played pretty much, in his prime. But he went about it differently, which is, most guys go, I want to hit home runs because home runs get you paid. Ichiro's different. Ricky Henderson's 130 stolen bases. Can somebody get to that? Absolutely, but opportunity is the problem. So it's like, who values stolen bases right now? Not that many teams. With the analytics and the theory that basically you want to get guys on base, high on base percentage, and then hit the 3-run homer. If you strike out, doesn't matter. Walks, power, that's what matters. Launch angle, all this stuff plays into that. So, number one, you just don't get the green light as often as Ricky Henderson, who obviously had the unlimited green light, but just any player in general, because they don't want to waste an out. The other thing about this is you have to be a damn good hitter to steal 130 bases, because you need to be on base a lot in order to even have green light or not. Just being on first base is basically you're doing. So you got to hit, you got to walk. So Ricky Henderson was the ultimate, hitter, patience, and obviously incredible speed. But what made Ricky, obviously, is extremely fast. I don't know if you want to rank him against somebody who you pick, but he was a very intelligent base runner. The pitchers, the reads, the timing. That's what base stealing is. There's plenty of guys who play baseball who are plenty enough fast to steal plenty of bases, and they just can never get that timing and that part of the game. And then there's other guys who aren't that fast who steal 20 bases, and you're like, how did he do that? It's all reads. David Wright was like that. Jeter was like that, where they would never steal a lot of bases because they were obviously limited in terms of speed. So you're not going to steal 70 bases just because, you're smart. But 20, 30, you'll get there. And that's what those guys did because they knew the game. So base running is such an art, cutting the bases, and turning a single into a double or a double into a triple. Those little nuances that you don't really pay attention to and the average fan might not really care about, but that's the difference. So if you care about somebody getting thrown out at second, trying to stretch it, you should care about obviously the base running. And it's not the decisions all the time. Sometimes it's the mechanics of the route. Because sometimes the decisions are correct, but the player takes a misstep, all that type of stuff plays into it. So I don't see that happening just because of what I just said, but Sandy Koufax, this is another thing that opportunity is not going to be there. Sandy Koufax, 300 Ks. A lot of different guys, had over 300 strikeouts in a season over time. But obviously Sandy Koufax put them together with some historic seasons, one of the greatest pitchers over a period that you'll ever see. And all those Ks came with a lot of innings. One of the seasons, it might have been the 382. I think he threw 355 innings. Now, when you say that today, it's like, well, the coach should be arrested, And obviously, Koufax is an example of somebody blowing their arm out, tendinitis, and just couldn't throw anymore. So was that all the innings? Could be, probably. Was it bad luck? Could be. It could be a lot of different things. I mean, they've been studying the arm for 1,000 years at this point, not literally, but in terms of throwing a baseball. Number one, throwing a baseball overhand is not a natural movement. You're not supposed to do that. That's why softball pitchers could throw, 7 games in a row and, they're not risking health. You're not supposed to throw a ball overhand, so it's a lot of stress. You're not supposed to snap. You ever thrown a curveball or slider in your life or tried to? You feel it. And if you do it in slow motion, your head, the mechanics of that arm action, you could see where things, only got so much they could take before something goes on you. So that was his, basically problem is he just couldn't hold up, but one of the greatest pitchers ever. And I truly believe one thing on this innings thing, because, Bob Gibson's next, another, again, you're throwing a ton of innings, but I think throwing more is what a lot of the problem is, and not throwing more pitching, meaning kids now, they start at 9, they start travel ball, they're pitchers, only pitchers. And it's like, what are you talking about? But that's how it goes. And then they grow up, 11, 12, and, kids are getting Tommy John surgery at 14. It's really a problem. And then obviously when at the major and minor league level, I mean, name, a pitching staff right now that didn't have somebody in that staff have Tommy John surgery. Now, the medicine's so good that basically you're going to recover, and quite honestly, you come back better. It's like a brand new arm, stronger. But everybody has that issue. And again, back then you could say, well, maybe guys had it. Like Tanaka on the Yankees has a torn, partially torn UCL, which is what the ligament damage in the Tommy John surgery is there to repair, but he pitches through it. So I'm sure a lot of guys, that was the case. They just didn't say anything, and that was it, and oh well. But I just think throwing specialized and throwing in general are two different things, and I think they need, at a young age, to start throwing more and build that arm strength, long toss. When I played in college, like I never long tossed ever. I pitched, and then I got to college, and one of my roommates was a Miami guy, and Bob Lazar was the Miami pitching coach back then. And Miami baseball, Hurricanes baseball, great program. And all he preached to his pitchers, they didn't do any special drills or these secret things. He preached long toss. So they do their bullpens and whatever, but long toss, that's all they did. He's like, and obviously that influenced guy on my team and influenced us, and I probably picked up 3 or 4 miles an hour from doing that. I wish I was doing it my whole life, but I didn't know. It is what it is. But long toss, if you got a kid or if you're in a 50 and over, overhand league, hardball, long toss, it strengthens your stuff up, it loosens it out, it gets the blood flowing, it's good for you. But Bob Gibson's year in 1.12 ERA in 1968, it's historic for a lot of reasons. Number one, obviously it's the lowest ERA. Number two, Bob Gibson, just the persona of him, intimidating. He'll throw at your head. He don't care if he hurts you. He's a nasty guy. Contrary to popular belief, that's not necessarily who he was in life, but competing on the mound, that's who he was for sure. So there's a switch that went off with him once it was game time. Because otherwise, a lot of people say, he'd hang out. He wasn't, overly friendly or overly shy. He was kind of in the middle. One of the guys. And once that game day approached and the time approached and time for first pitch, it was a whole different animal entirely. And the other thing that was big in that year, which changed, was the mound was 15 inches high and it was raised up, and the strike zone was basically like armpits to knees, but legitimately like whatever the rule book says today for Major League Baseball strike zone, we all know it's not followed to the letter of the law, which is why when they bring in these mechanical umpires, the robots that they want so bad, it's going to cause a war. Because I watched a couple minor league games where they had it implemented, and curveballs, the machine just had a huge problem with it because, again, where the ball is crossing and landing, obviously it's supposed to be where the ball crosses, but now the computer's set at standard. So let's say armpits to knees, like literally knees. So a curveball that crosses at the knees could bounce basically right after it crosses the plate. Now, if you see that on TV and you see a curveball bounce and then you see the umpire call it a strike, that's going to lead to some riots from the players. So we'll see how that goes, but I'm going to tell you right now, once they implement it or try it, it's not going to last long. It's just not. The players are not going to put up with it because the pitchers are going to use it to their advantage until the kinks get worked out. And who knows how long that could be. So bouncing a curveball or starting curveballs low, it's going to be impossible for the hitters to adjust to that. So that's my view on that. But after this season, 68, it was dominant. 4 pitchers. The overall league ERA was under 3. I think it was like 2.9 or something. And then they raised it back up after this year. And the ERA went up to, almost a full run, probably less than, somewhere that a very considerable raise. So let's say 2.9 went to 3.7, somewhere in that range. But the high fastball was Gibson's big weapon along with the slider. So 2 pitches, and that was it. 2 pitches and intimidation. Game over. Ted Williams here, basically, we see some comments. So he had 406. That was 1941. He was the last guy to do it. And let's see. Got people saying. So Ted Williams hitting 406 is quite an accomplishment, but it's not the record. Okay, that is true. Back, I guess they're probably talking about here. So Christopher agrees. Obviously, it was not a 1941 record. He's aware of that. And basically brings up some of the other numbers of when it's happened. But here's an interesting little thing he brings up. 19th century, a base on ball, a walk counted as a hit. So obviously, if you did that today, you'd see some huge averages, but that's how it was in the post-modern era, the pre-modern era. And he goes to say, basically, if you're looking at Williams' season, it really is an amazing accomplishment, which I'll actually get into. Let's see what they say here. So, Cameron, I agree with everything you're saying. I was just making sure you were aware it wasn't the record in the context of the post. Okay, so the good thing about sports is people can talk about it. Sports debate, so this isn't really a debate. It's just more making sure, on a stat. But that's what makes sports nice is conversation. So when you're talking about it, because again, like I started this, there's no right answer to what's the most impressive thing to somebody statistically. But you can argue any point and somebody else could argue, and you could use numbers and, use this number or that number to prove your case. And it's just one of those things. There's never a conclusion, which is what's great about it, because you can literally argue. 2 guys sitting in a bar could come up with a topic and they could argue about it for the rest of their lives, and there will still not be a winner when it comes to statistics and who's the best. So something right now that's going on. Any basketball fans, ESPN put out a top 74 list, and you saw a lot of backlash on the list, which ESPN lists normally suck, but this one was okay for the most part. Some weird things in there. But anyway, Kobe Bryant was number 9. A lot of people had like, oh, how could you have him number 9? And if you're going to say, how could he be number 9? He should be higher. Whoever it is, you got to have some information behind it. You can't just say that. So if you're going to have a point, let me know why and where it should be. Should it be 2, 3? Because I read 100 players, and not one of them said, like, why compared to Tim Duncan, who's ahead of him at 8 or something like that. But anyway, so now we have a little chart here, player comparison. Okay, so Joe DiMaggio, who won the MVP that year in Williams, came in second. 13. See, that's amazing too. 13 Ks to 27 Ks for the whole season from 2 of the best players. It's unreal. But let's click here because you'll see all the 400 hitters, and you see there's a lot of them. So when people think it's like, oh, well, Ted Williams, Ty Cobb did it a few times, Roger Hornsby, more popular names, and then the dead ball era guys, which obviously you see 485 and 1887. So good stuff. Obviously, Baseball Almanac, Baseball Reference, I like. Always good to look at the numbers because some things shock you when you look at it, which is, if you weren't aware of this, who brought up this point was Christopher Rowe. Like, just putting that out there, definitely somebody clicked it and was like, wow, I didn't realize that so many guys hit 400 and why 400 was much easier to get to back then. So good little back and forth there, good information. Now we have another one. Christopher Rowe is going to get commenter of the year so far because he's active. Nice job. So Roger Downey, presently if a pitcher threw 200 plus innings, that to me is impressive, and that's the key. To me, like I said, as a position player, 200 plus hits would be impressive. Okay, so author chimes in about Scherzer, Verlander, and basically those guys are almost the last breed of workhorse when you think about it, and everyone now is like, with the different management of bullpens, who knows how many innings guys are really going to throw down the road. It might be 100 would be leading the league. It's possible. But Christopher says Ichiro, obviously the 262 hits, which we saw already. And then he says 200 innings, a dozen or so times, which is true. Like, it's not an anomaly, 200 innings by any means. 200 hits is rarer. Like last year, Whit Merrifield, I think. Yeah, Whit Merrifield. He had 206 hits. He led the league. And there's one other player who had Devers had 201 or something. Everyone else was under. So there's not a lot of guys that do it every year, but it is few. And on Whit Merrifield, if you ever look at his contract and know anything about Whit Merrifield on the Royals, he has the worst agent in baseball. I don't know who it is, but whoever negotiated that contract for him really messed up. 28 years old, he signed it off a all-star appearance, 296 career hitter, and the guy signs 4 years, $16 million extension. What? $4 million a year for a guy who's stole 40 plus bases and hit over 300? But anyway, so all right, so there's the list. Fox Sports, guy's over 200, and basically Roger's saying, listen, that's what impresses me the most. Which he has a point, because with the way the game's played, 200 innings and 200 hits are going to become less and less likely, because it's just a different game. So like I was saying before, the 200 hits, like guys walk a lot more. Guys strike out a lot more. That means less balls in play, less chance for actual hits. The pitchers, bullpens are almost getting to the point where they're more important than the actual starting pitchers. There's also more starting pitchers. So the rotations you see, like the Mets, sometimes they got 6-man rotations. All these things are just lengthening out basically the starts in terms of how many innings they actually throw per start and how many starts they actually have. So you're going to see innings for a starting pitcher pitch never approach the levels they were, but it's just going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. Well, right now you throw over 200 innings, you're a workhorse. If you get to 180, that's generally the benchmark of like, once you hit 180, like if your first season you come up, they want you to throw about 120 to 150. That's like the safe range. And then your first full season after that, it's 180. Like if you get to 180, throw 187 and then not be hurt, generally they feel that you'll last. You're not going to have any, unless, it's kind of a freakish thing where something just goes on you. But the Tommy John or the shoulder issues are kind of going to avoid you if you could get past that 180 and then the next year the 200. So those first 3 years, basically 120, 180, 200. If you last there and you're in year 4 and no injuries, you're good. Max Scherzer talks about this all the time, in terms of judging a young pitcher. Like if he's going to last, is can he hit those thresholds, maintain his stuff, be effective, and get past the first 4 years. Because again, don't forget, minor leagues are before that, so they're throwing, innings there, which once they get built up, that's why the 120, 150 kind of comes in for an early year pitcher. And that impresses Roger. It impresses me too. It's not the most impressive thing to me, but it does impress me because you just see it less likely to happen in the future, which is an interesting turn. So basically, Christopher believes it's a pedestrian stat, which, like I just said, it could be viewed as that if you just kind of look at raw. This is where sports get crazy, because if you just look at numbers and you say 10 to 20 guys throw 20, yes, but then when you look into context a little bit, it's becoming more impressive to do, because really, if you throw 200 innings nowadays, look at the guys. You're generally a top of the league pitcher, where back, 50s, 60s, those eras, if you threw 200 innings, you could be, the worst pitcher in the league. That's just what they did. So basically, Chris has got a point, Roger's got a point. And Roger, some will retire, some go on, some have career years, others might get close again. All I'm saying is that with all the specialty players, runners, defensive specialists, relief pitchers, pitch counts, even though there are more innings in the old days and more players, there's going to be less and less chance to make things happen. So that impressed me. That does not mean they are not, Hall of Fame material, but basically it impressed him. So both people are right here if you're taking it, in certain contexts. So Chris is right if you're just looking at numbers-wise. It doesn't really stack up to some of the other stats. Roger's looking at it as, hey, this is a change in baseball, and it's something that if you do get to those numbers, it's impressive because you just don't have as much opportunity to do it. So interesting little debate there. But again, both people are right in their views. All right, so here's my take. What impressed me the most? A few things. One is just kind of, I know it will be broken, but the fact that, someone could throw a 105-mile-an-hour fastball, which I remember Joel Zumaya doing it. I don't know if that was official, though, but I think Chapman has, obviously, the radar gun says 105. I don't know the exact velocity they have, like, on record books, maybe 104. I don't think it's 105. It might be, but the velocity of the fastball getting to that point, that always sticks in my mind. Like, when is somebody going to throw 107? What is that going to look like? Is it going to get to a point where guys can throw at a level that you can't physically hit without just sticking your bat out? Like, you can't, there's not enough time to take a full swing. That's something that I always think about, because you hear a story of Bob Feller throwing like 111 and he used a police radar, like roadside thing, or a radar gun. But who knows? But there will get a point, I feel, as just over time, athletes evolve. The amount of pitchers throwing 95 plus miles an hour in the 90s compared to the 2000s, compared to now, obviously moving forward, it jumped dramatically. Like, everybody who's, not 18 years old at this point, who's 25, 30, you'll remember a point in time when you're watching baseball where if somebody came in throwing 96 miles an hour, you're like, oh my God, who is this guy? And generally it was like, the top reliever, like, Roger Clemens type, those guys. Now it's like, if a reliever comes into a game today and is throwing under 95, you're like, why is he in baseball? Which is unbelievable, because obviously for a billion years they proved you don't have to throw 100 miles an hour to get people out. Greg Maddux, but it's just the way it's went, where they draft on velocity. If you throw 96 in high school, you will be drafted, guaranteed. Will you ever be good or not? Who knows? But you got the first thing, which is something they can't teach, but you can improve a little bit. You might be able to add 3 miles, like I said, 3, 4, 5 miles an hour. You're not going to add 20 miles an hour at that point, but you add a little bit. But you can't teach that. Like, you can't teach someone throwing 80 in high school to throw 98 in 3 years, after high school. This is not happening. So they start with power and they move from there. But when is somebody going to, like, really blow somebody away, literally? And it's just like, okay, that's not fair. And is it physically possible? I think it is, but is it? Is there a point where your arm would just cannot, the tendons couldn't take that pressure? Who knows? But real statistics, I got two that stick out. One, Barry Bonds, obviously steroids, no doubt about it. Obviously it helped him. Obviously, I think most people agree he's a great player anyway and would have been a great player, whatever. Let's leave that aside, because, again, statistics have an emotional thing to it when you're talking about the home run record and Bonds breaking Aaron, so you don't want to talk about that so much. And 73 home runs for Bonds, breaking the single season, which was obviously McGwire and Sosa, but McGwire had 70. Again, steroids. And then go back to Roger Maris with 61 and Babe Ruth with 60. So those are like holy grail type of things where there's a lot of emotion attached to it. So I don't want to talk about those. They're obviously insane when you look at them, but let's leave this aside. The one thing I will talk about, which was still from the steroid era, was his intentional walk record from 2004 is so absurd that it's almost hard to imagine anybody ever even getting near that number. He was intentionally walked in 2004 120 times. That is like 120. So if you follow stats like fantasy baseball, if you play that, you see, like, if a guy walks over 100 times, that's Mike Trout. There's not a lot of guys who do that. Joey Votto, like, few and far between even get to 100 walks. He had 120 intentional walks, which obviously blows the record. I think the American League record's like 33. I think it's John Olerud or somebody, but somebody you wouldn't think of. But it's like 33. He had 120. And that year he had 232 walks, which obviously is the most all time. Also, and second on that list was Babe Ruth at 170. So the fact that he was so feared that 120 times, when, like I said earlier, you get 550 plate appearances, 600, physical appearances. 120 of those, the guys didn't want to bother, and bases loaded, he was intentionally walked. In the postseason that year, he's walked, I think, 28 more times. Just insanity when you really think about that, the level of fear pitchers and managers had of him wrecking the game. Because literally, during those years, if he was swinging, it was going to be a hard hit ball. That's it. So that is unbelievable, this whole walk thing. So I'll leave it at that with Bonds, and I'll do another one just because some people just discount, obviously, the steroids, which is fine. But Babe Ruth hitting more home runs than the entire league in terms of team home runs. So to think about that, the National League, this was 1920, he hit 54 home runs, and 29 were American League, and then the National League, the Reds had 64 as a team to beat him. So add up everybody's home runs on the team, and he hit more home runs than any of those numbers except for the Reds. That is obviously insanity. That would never happen again. Add up, the Yankees lineup. How many home runs do they hit? And then, you'd have to hit 300 home runs, because you're competing against every team. And it's not just like one team, like, maybe a team. But even those numbers, I mean, you're talking, you got to hit over 100 home runs, 200 home runs, not happening. So that is insanity. And that's why Babe Ruth, people argue, about who's the best player of all time. Babe Ruth is on top of many lists, but unlike like basketball, Michael Jordan, where it's like Michael Jordan, and then you say, LeBron or this or that, but it always ends up being Michael Jordan at the end of the day for most people. Babe Ruth kind of swings. There's a lot of different interpretations of where he ranks all time, like the Baseball Legends series. I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but it's not number one. So you could obviously read about that, but the things that he did were obviously absurd. So I want to go back just quick with the Ted Williams thing, because in here, where was it? Basically, he was saying, Christopher again, if you look at his season in 1941. So I'll end with this. 1941, World War II is the next year, which obviously Ted Williams partook in. So it was his last year before service. And the first time that you saw a shift. Now, this is contrary to popular belief where, Boudreaux shift or Ted Williams shift was named. And then obviously today we see the shift all the time. It wasn't then that it was first. It was actually Jimmy Dykes in the Chicago White Sox in 1941 that tried it first. Now, Ted Williams was 23 at this point. Ted Williams, by everybody's account, was a different guy at 23 than he was later on after some of the wars and obviously his career. But back then, 23 years old, he was more willing to hit the ball the other way, and that's what he did. So the first time he saw the shift, he actually yelled over to Dykes and said, what are you doing? What are you doing, man? This is not how we play. And he's like, all right, you're going to do that. And he hit a double down the left field line. And later on, he bunted against it. So he was willing to take his hits. As he got older, he said, okay, shift all you want. I'm just going to hit the ball so hard, it's not going to matter. And one of his things was he loved being known or thought of as the greatest pull hitter. That was like a big thing to him for whatever reason. Some guys are offended, like, I'm not only a pull hitter, I go up all the time. But he liked that, so that was his thing. And what made it really even more remarkable or interesting is the way he got there. So heading into the final weekend, I might have some of the days or things wrong, so correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but the final weekend, he was at or around 400. He's definitely going to that Friday of the last three, last weekend set. He was somewhere around that range, and then after Saturday's game, he went 1 for 4. Roger Wolf was a rookie pitcher. I remember that. and he dropped him to like 399.95. Okay. Baseball would round that up to 400. So if he didn't play Sunday, which was a doubleheader, he would have been in the record books as a 400 average. Okay. There was obviously thought that, hey, why not sit out? You already proved it. You hit 400, Ted, but that wasn't good enough for him. And if I talked about Ted Williams in another video, like his mentality always was he had just something to prove, and he was very sensitive, and criticism bothered him. And that's why in the media video, he was one of the guys. Like, he had fights with the fans. He had fights with the media. He had fights with, like, he just took things very personally, okay? The fact in his mind that I know this had to be it was he didn't want to leave anything for somebody to criticize, where if he stopped, yes, it would have been rounded up to 400, but it wouldn't have been 400. And somebody, and probably a lot of people, media, people didn't like him that much because he was a tough guy to get along with, would have brought that up and bugged him about it. I mean, one thing that he said was like, he's like, I'm waiting for someone else to hit 400 because I'm sick of being asked about it. So let somebody else take the reign. So he was just one of those guys that he had some approved, chip on his shoulder, and he didn't want you having something over him. So let me play, because his manager said you don't have to play. You already, you proved it. You proved it. You can hit 400. And he's like, no. So he played. Doubleheader now. First game, first at bat, gets a hit. So now his average, I think it bumped up to like 402. So now the next at bat, if he would have got out, he would have been 1 for 2. He'd been right at 400, legit 400 on the dot. He got a hit then, and then it went on and on from there. He ended up ending that day at the first game at 4 for 5. Interestingly, though enough, Crash Davis made an error on one of Williams' hit balls. That was the one non-hit in the 4 for 5 first game. And everybody said that it was a horrible, call by the book. So he might have went 5 for 5 in everybody's mind, but on paper he went 4 for 5. And after that, now he's over, and then he plays the second game, and he ends up 6 for 8 overall, and ended at 406, which is the last time. And again, you're talking 1941 that anyone's hit 400. Do I think somebody will hit 400 again? Yes, but I think it has to be a very special player in this day and age. Number one, the pressure that will come with that as you get to the end of the season. I really think it would have to be a player on a team that's not really in it in terms of playoffs, because I don't think with the media and the social and it would just be a circus if somebody was hitting 400 going into the last month of the season. Just like another Joe DiMaggio's record, the consecutive hit streak, 56. Like, once you get up there to a certain level, we've seen some guys, get in there a little bit, but never to the point where it's like 50, 51, 52, 54. And now it's like, okay, here's the weekend series. Are you going to do it or not? And that pressure would be crazy. So if you throw on winning on top of it, I don't think that's the ideal situation. So I think it would have to be somebody on a bad team or just an average team. I also think it's somebody who can handle pressure and criticism, because, again, Ted Williams back then had a hard time handling it. Think about Ted Williams in today's game. I mean, he might have imploded already. Who knows? Social media and all this stuff. So you got that. You also have somebody where you need to have somebody like an Ichiro. Speed, because there's so many different pitchers, there's so many different angles and this and that, where putting the ball in play and having speed to get a couple of the cheap hits, we'll call them, or beat out a slow grounder that, a slower player that's definitely an out. You need that to even get close to that. So I don't think It could be like Cody Bellinger started the season off real hot. Like the first month he was over 400. But if you're hitting 40, 45, 50 home runs, you're not hitting 400. It's just not happening. You might hit 340. You're not hitting 400. So I think it has to be a non-power, fast, Ichiro type. Could get there moving down the road in the future. So hope you enjoyed that. We'll see what happens tomorrow. I'll give you an update on baseball labor stuff, which doesn't look too good, but we'll talk about that tomorrow. Have a good night, everybody. See you soon.